So our leading story tonight, without help, Eskom will struggle to survive beyond April, it says. The Department of Public Enterprises today confirming that Eskom is not making enough money just to meet its operational costs and service its debt every month. That means that the black hole of debt at Eskom is getting bigger. It's in a very negative spiral at the moment. It already has 420 billion rand worth of debt. So without help, that's set to climb. And if the power utility defaults on its debts, of course, that threatens the entire South African economy. This comes on the third day of load shedding, causing frustration across South Africa. OUTA, the organisation undoing tax abuse, suggesting this may be costing us 5 billion rand per day. Now, in a report this week, Moody said the plan to split Eskom into three could lead to more transparency, but would do little to address the producers' problems. In a new report, Moodys has also warned that South Africa's power supply will remain tight for at least the next 5 years. To discuss, we're joined by the lead analyst for Eskom from Moodys, Helen Francis, on the line from London. Helen, thank you for being with us. You've looked at Eskom's woes for a while, looking at its decreased ability to supply the power required. However, did the current load shedding stage 3, stage 4 surprise even you?
Well, I mean, I think, what one needs to bear in mind that the reserve margin in South Africa, that means the amount of available capacity to meet demand, has always been very tight. And what's happening at the moment is the plant's availability is suffering problems, i.e. the plant can't produce as much energy as it normally would do. And this is obviously creating the load shedding problems that the company is currently experiencing.
And even with the split, Helen, you're saying that this will continue until the mid-2020s. Explain further.
Yeah, so I think the issue is what we call the reserve margin is going to remain tight. So even when, if Eskom can improve the plant's performance at the moment, because it has quite a lot of plants, about 6 or 7 gigawatts of old plants that are due to retire, that even with the new plants at Moody and Kuzile, the remaining units that are due to come online with the mid-2020s, it's still going to be a fine balance in terms of maintaining that reserve margin. So it's going to be critical that Eskom can improve its plant availability. And the other issue, of course, is around evolution of demand. Because in South Africa, demand's actually slightly decreased over the past 10 years, that could help the situation. But of course, if demand increases, that may put more pressure on the system. And in terms of your first point about splitting the company up, really all that will do is create extra transparency around the revenues and costs of the various businesses of Eskom, transmission, distribution and generation. In and of itself, it's not going to resolve the supply issue, and it's not going to solve Eskom's financial woes.
So given the current financial woes, I think even you have looked at the options. Either higher prices for us as consumers, which will be hard to stomach, more load shedding, I mean, we just carry on, or a government bailout. Is that the way to go? Are you waiting for that?
Well, I think clearly the measures that we expect to be announced over the next few weeks are going to be very important in our assessment of Eskom's credit strength. And as we know, as the President indicated last week, we should expect some news in the budget on potentially some financial support from the government. But perhaps this also needs to go hand in hand with tariff increases. As we know, Eskom has applied for 15% year-on-year tariff increases, and the regulator is due to come out with its decision next month. So really, we'll need to take a look at the combination of those measures and then the other cost-cutting measures that Eskom can introduce on its own account to see what impacts that will have on the financial strength of the company.
Well, obviously, we want to avoid downgrades. Can you say what sort of combination, what sort of efforts will be credit positive for us?
Well, I think it's hard to be specific because obviously we need to wait for that news to come out. But I think certainly, we'll be looking at a combination of measures that may be announced over the next few weeks to see what that may mean for Eskom.
Can you not comment on maybe the size of the rescue package? Is there sort of a a minimum threshold that Eskom needs, that you want to or hear about, or something that you want to hear about from the Finance Minister in that budget speech?
Well, again, I think it's hard to be specific. I think we need to look at the combination of measures to see whether, on a combined basis, they can resolve Eskom's issues, at least put it back into a more stable financial footing. Eskom themselves asked for around 100 billion adjustment in their debt onto the government balance sheet, didn't they? So it'd be interesting to see how the government responds to that request.
Can you comment at all, Helen, on current sort of efforts right now? Do they impress you or not? I mean, there is an acceptance that Moody and Kusile were badly designed, an acceptance that there's been state capture and corruption. There is a plan to let more gas energy in, and also a more immediate plan to bring in foreign engineers. We heard that from the minister today.
Well, I think probably all measures that will help Eskom address its operational issues in the near term are going to be positive for the company. But I think also we need to take a broader view and consider the evolution of the company over the longer term. So clearly, Eskom needs to get to grips with its current issues, and all these measures may help to restore that improved plant maintenance that we talked about. Clearly, problems that Moody and Kusile aren't helping the situation. So I think a resolution of those problems, would be obviously positive for Eskom, positive for the country. I think in its current situation.
I know you focus on Eskom, but can you talk about that link? How Eskom's credit rating, how Eskom's viability is so important for our country's credit rating?
Well, of course, at the moment, we have a Baa3 stable rating on the government, but as we pointed out in a note that we put out last week, that clearly Eskom does represent a significant risk to the government's fiscal strength. So we will be looking to see whether any financial support the government may talk about in the budget next week, plus there's other measures we've talked about, tariff increases and so on, do enough to restore Eskom's financial equilibrium. But I think until we see the measures, it's really difficult to comment further.
And on the unbundling, you did say it'll lead to more transparency, also a greater number of producers. Just tell us how you see it working, how it could possibly open up the grid, which many have called for years.
Yeah, well, I think that, that is a stage. If one looks at other markets that have gone through this development, electricity markets, normally what we call an unbundling of the grid, a separation to their separate activities, and then more freedom of the system operator to engage with potential new participants into the market, can be a positive step towards creating an environment where new entrants could come in, and when we're looking at the potential development, the country's strategic plan, which is looking to encourage more renewables and the potential greater role to be played by gas in the energy sector in the second half of the 2020s. But I think the thing that we need to bear in mind that if you're looking to attract new investors into the sector, they're going to be seeking for a return on their investment, that their costs will be covered by an appropriate regulatory framework and tariff framework. So I think that's obviously one of the pieces that would need to fall into place over the next few years, and potentially it could come as a cost to the consumer, because new capacity tends to cost money.
And finally, Ms. Francis, if there is unbundling, the split into three, should there be job losses? Can you comment on that?
No, I couldn't really comment on that. I think that really is up to the authorities in conjunction with Eskom to decide how that unbundling may play out. I think just in the first stage, that's just going to be a separation for the three entities and to create more transparency between the costs allocated to those various businesses.
All right, so there will be interest in our budget speech coming up very soon, and a bailout expected for Eskom. Thank you very much. That was Helen Francis from Moody's credit rating agency.